In this episode, U Lethbridge education professor Dr. Robin Bright asks an important question. Does reading even matter anymore? In a world of endless scrolling through social media, does reading even matter anymore? Whether you're an avid reader, an educator, or someone who has not picked up a book in years, there is value in studying both reading and readers for cognitive and social health. In this talk, Dr. Bright will argue that understanding how we read, how we learn to read, and what reading can do for us is more important than ever.
Kind introduction, Lisa. Thank you to the University of Lethbridge for this opportunity to participate in the public professor series, and thank you all for being here this evening. So, let's get right to it. Does reading even matter anymore? Dr. Seuss, in his signature whimsical style, captured a fundamental truth about reading. It is the gateway to knowledge, imagination, and opportunity. His words, the more you read, the more things you will know, the more that you learn, the more places you'll go, remind us that reading is more than just a skill. It's a vehicle for exploration, understanding, and growth. But we live in a world where you can ask your phone to summarize a book, binge watch a series that turns 800-page epics into 8 episodes, or learn an entire recipe from a 30-second TikTok video. Why bother reading when technology does so much for us? Why wrestle with words on a page when Siri, Alexa, and ChatGPT can just tell us the gist? Our world is dominated today by digital media, social platforms, ever-shortening attention spans, making this question, does reading even matter anymore, more important than ever? Is it still essential in shaping informed, critical thinkers? Or has it been replaced by quick, visual, and interactive content? Well, here's the thing. Reading isn't just about consuming information. It's about experiencing it, thinking about it, questioning it. It's about diving into someone else's thoughts, exploring new worlds, and wrestling with ideas you didn't even know existed. Sure, streaming platforms can dazzle us with epic visuals, but a book lets you build the movie in your head. And trust me, your imagination has unlimited CGI budget. In this lecture, I would like us to consider the role of reading in childhood and adulthood, in Alberta and Canada and the global community, in health and well-being, in schools and in teacher education, and finally, as a declaration of our personal freedom. Because if Dr. Seuss was right, and I believe he was, then the future of reading is the future of our ability to think, dream, and go places we never imagined. So I have very few vivid memories of reading as a child, and I'm sure you have your own, but I have a couple. The first was as a grade 1 student in our rented house in Calgary. My dad was attending the University of Calgary, and my mom was home with my sister Louise. I was reading to my mom in the kitchen as she prepared supper. She hardly said a word as I pointed to each word with my finger, trying to remember what sounds the letters made, slowly, laboriously sounding out the letters. Some words came easily, and when I got them right, I felt proud. When I got stuck, my mom waited, maybe giving a gentle hint. But what I really remember is feeling safe. It was okay to take my time and make mistakes. And my positive early reading experiences helped me associate books and reading with a sense of security and joy. Now, I have to tell you, some of those positive feelings towards reading were tested throughout my school years. To this day, I harbor an unhealthy loathing of the book Lord of the Flies. I'm sorry if it's a favorite of yours. especially after I discovered a fabulous book called Beauty Queens by Libba Bray that serves as a satirical alternative to Lord of the Flies, offering a humorous take on survival, power, and societal expectations. Beauty Queens flips the script by centering on teenage girls stranded on an island, challenging gender norms and media influence. I would have eaten that up in high school if it had been written back then. I would say I didn't become an avid reader until I was in my 20s. It was then in university that I began taking courses and reading about topics that really interested me, bringing back those memories of feeling safe again as a reader. But then, and most importantly, as Lisa pointed out, I became a teacher, a grade 1 teacher at the beginning of my teaching career. I was terrified. But my main goal was to teach children how to read. And of course, I became a parent, and I wanted our daughters to not only read, but to love to read and experience those same feelings of safety, to explore emotions, new ideas, even fears through books without real-world consequences. Throughout my own journey as a reader and a teacher, a parent, a new grandparent, and finally as a teacher-educator, I was determined to help students learn to read and see joy in reading. So this evening, I'm excited to share some of the findings and insights I discovered on this journey as we examine the question, does reading even matter anymore? Parents, teachers, and caregivers all want children and loved ones to learn to read. Hardly anyone I know sends their children off to school hoping they'll learn to type with their thumbs, or use emojis, or lose hours of their day scrolling and watching YouTube videos. No way. Why do we want our children to learn to read? Because intuitively, we know that reading develops critical thinking and problem solving and creativity. Parents and caregivers hope their children, through reading, will gain the ability to understand and analyze information and disinformation, communicate effectively, and build strong academic skills that will help them throughout their lives. The goal of reading is to prepare them for a future, whatever that might look like, where they can navigate the world with knowledge and empathy and the ability to adapt to challenges regardless of the technology they may encounter. And let's just be clear about what we're talking about here. Ben McNally, owner of the Ben McNally Books in Toronto, says, yes, reading is good, but don't confuse reading with that flash of information you get off your phone or computer, he says. Even to comprehend basic news, what's happening in your community needs more than a casual glance at a screen. It's ludicrous to believe you can really understand the issues without spending some time reading. Okay, well, let's examine some recent pan-Canadian studies to find out more about the value of reading and also what challenges our ability to read and our interest in reading. Research, including that from the Canadian Children's Literacy Foundation, consistently shows that children who develop strong reading skills early in life tend to perform better in school across all subjects, not just in English or language arts. In fact, reading proficiency by the end of 3rd grade is often a strong predictor of later academic achievement, high school graduation rates, and even career success. Simply put, when children learn to read, they unlock the ability to think and learn. And the benefits extend beyond the classroom as well. Studies consistently demonstrate that strong reading skills have significant positive effects on personal outcomes as well. A 2007 study by the National Institute for Literacy found that strong readers are more likely to be well-adjusted, confident, and successful in their professional lives. The act of reading teaches not only literacy, but also qualities that we have come to associate with learning, such as discipline, focus, and perseverance. And these traits serve individuals in all aspects of life. The global organization Deloitte in 2020 provided a report entitled Children's Literacy and the Economy, with findings that show the importance of early literacy, saying that the quality of a child's learning in the years before grade 1 makes a massive difference in their ability to read, write, and communicate later in life. The grade 1 teachers here know that. But according to the report, up to 27% of children start grade 1 without some of the early developmental skills they need to be able to learn to read. Furthermore, a 2013 study by the Education Quality and Accountability Office found that almost 1 in 3 Ontario kindergarten students were deemed vulnerable or at risk in their language and cognitive development, making them less likely to meet provincial standards for reading, writing, and math by grade 3. More recently, during the pandemic, the Toronto District School Board reported a 10% decline in grade 1 reading skills compared to 2018-2019 school year. More on Alberta students a little bit later. Some of these results can be attributed to the global pandemic, but research points to other long-standing factors that contribute to these findings. Researcher Catherine Compton-Lilly writes, individual propensities, cognitive strengths, cultural practices, linguistic practices, and literacy experiences all affect how children become literate. And I want to point out that Compton-Lilly does not view these factors as deficits. I was recently invited to deliver lectures on the topic of teaching reading to teachers and school administrators in Sweden. One of the teachers I spoke to had just returned to teaching from a maternity leave, so I inquired about childcare arrangements. She told me that Sweden provides free universal access to full-time preschool for children from ages 1 to 5. Sweden's preschool system encourages an equitable approach to early childhood education. Canada's approach varies by province, with limited universal access and high parental costs. Sweden's strong early education policies contribute to consistently high literacy rates, while Canada, despite strong overall literacy, faces regional disparities due to inconsistent early childhood education access. Clearly, investments in early literacy in this country would address inequities and strengthen opportunities for all children. Some good news is that the adults, that's you, in a child's life, including parents, caregivers, grandparents, aunts, uncles, family, friends, librarians, I didn't forget you, and community leaders, can act as what the literature calls sponsors of literacy, providing encouragement and access to reading opportunities. A good friend of mine was recently asked to look after a family member, a friendly, buoyant, elementary-aged boy during professional school days in school. And she took it upon herself to take him to the Galt Museum, to look at the exhibits, read the information. She took him to the Helen Schuler Cooley Center to examine the maps and read about animals. And then one afternoon, she suggested they read a book. And his response was, "This isn't school." Not to be deterred, we bought him a Dogman book by Dave Pilkey, very popular for 6 to 10-year-olds for him to take home. Fingers crossed. But that's just one example of how you can be a literacy sponsor and help support reading for those around you. You can see from my friend's experience that reading doesn't always come easy. And this is one of the reasons I took a year to research and write a book called Sometimes Reading is Hard. I wanted to take a snapshot of current and evolving research about best practices in how we teach and support reading. One finding I would like to share with you from this book is this: reading, unlike speaking, does not come naturally. It must be learned. Marianne Wolf, a Tufts University cognitive neuroscientist and child development expert, tells us that reading is a remarkably complex cognitive process that some have described as a neurological triple backflip. When you read, you are truly exercising your brain. So, I want to acknowledge that reading does involve effort for us and for young people. And even if you can read, you might not choose to read. And this is called illiteracy. And I'd like to distinguish these two terms. Illiteracy refers to the inability to read or write. A person who's illiterate lacks basic literacy skills and cannot decode or comprehend written text. Alliteracy refers to the ability to read, but the lack of motivation or willingness to do so. An illiterate person can read, but chooses not to engage with books or other reading materials. Which do you think is more difficult to address? I'd like to share a story from a few years ago that helps us understand the difference between alliteracy and illiteracy. After my second book was published, called From Your Child's Teacher, co-written by two gifted teachers, Lisa McMullen and David Platt, I was speaking at a number of public libraries in Western Canada, mostly to audiences of parents. On one such occasion at the Edmonton Public Library, I looked out onto my audience of young families, maybe many with little children in tow, and I recall seeing a much older gentleman alone in the group. I gave my talk about how reading develops and answered a number of questions, and then the audience began to leave. But that one older gentleman stayed behind to chat. He said to me, "You probably wonder why I'm here." He then proceeded to tell me that he grew up without the ability to read, relying on his natural skills in manual labor to navigate his life. Then he married and had a family of his own and began to see a troubling pattern. His son also struggled with reading. Like his father, he relied on hands-on skills where reading wasn't as crucial for day-to-day life, but according to this gentleman, his son struggled in both his personal and professional lives. And then along came his grandson. This gentleman decided he had to take action and walked into the local library to find out what role he could play in supporting his grandson's literacy journey. So yes, reading matters, and it's never too late to discover that. A Canadian example of someone who struggled with early reading in life, but later turned that around to achieve success, is Chris Hadfield, the former Canadian astronaut. Hadfield's journey to success, particularly in overcoming early challenges related to literacy and reading, is one that resonates with many of us. And his story should be shared with children and young people. Chris Hadfield grew up on a farm in Ontario where reading and academics did not come naturally to him. He's spoken about how he struggled with some aspects of learning, but particularly with reading. However, like all children, he was incredibly curious and motivated. And his parents, acting like literacy sponsors, encouraged him to pursue his interests, especially in science and technology. So instead of focusing on his initial struggles with reading, he found joy in books about space exploration and aviation. Children and young people will read what they're interested in. Hadfield's story and the gentleman in the library story serve as examples of how it is possible to overcome early challenges in reading, but that sometimes it takes a village. Reading success is a shared responsibility. Perhaps you could be someone's literacy sponsor. Sometimes we don't engage in reading because, like the little boy that my friend looked after, we see reading as a chore. Well, let's talk about something that many readers, both kids and adults, don't even know about: a reader's Bill of Rights. This is a concept proposed by French literary theorist Daniel Pennock. These simple rights include the right to skip pages, the right to read aloud, the right to reread, and the right to read anything. Yet, many people feel constrained by outdated ideas of what reading should look like. I'd like to add to these 10 rights that there are no bad books and no bad readers. There are books for all moods, spaces, and seasons. Have you ever heard someone say you have to finish the book if you've started it? Or graphic novels don't count as real books? These ideas limit how people engage with reading, turning what should be a joy into a chore. Children's and YA author Kate DiCamillo says that reading should not be presented to children as a chore, a duty. It should be offered as a gift. This quote emphasizes the importance of making reading an enjoyable and enriching experience rather than a task or an obligation. It highlights how the love of reading can be fostered when it's seen as a rewarding and pleasurable activity. Pennock's rights remind us that reading is personal. Remember, it was space and aviation that helped turn Chris Hadfield into a reader? You can read what you want, when you want, and how you want. Don't like the book you've picked up? Close it and find another. Want to read the last page first? Go for it. Want to stick to audiobooks? That's valid too. The point isn't how you read. It's that you do read. By embracing these rights, or freedoms, I would call them, we might actually be inspired to fall in love with reading again. Ask yourself, what outdated ideas do you still have about how to read, what to read, when to read? These rights serve to remind us that reading can be an individualized, joyous experience, whether in the classroom or throughout life. Okay, let's just take a cursory look at what's happening in Canada with reading. The 2023 Canadian Leisure and Reading Study, sponsored by BookNet Canada, provides insight into the reading behaviors of Canadians. This data is collected every year to guide data-driven decisions in the Canadian book industry. This slide indicates that just over half, 52% of Canadian readers read between 1 and 5 books in 2023. 25% of those readers read between 6 and 12 books. 16% of those readers read between 12 and 49 books. And 7% of those readers, put your hands up, read 50 books or more. Yes, give yourselves a hand. Other findings about how Canadians read or how they consume the books that they read are interesting. 49% of Canadians read or listened to books weekly, with 31% of Canadians reported reading or listening to books once a day. Canadian readers in 2023 continued to prefer print books the most, 59%. Canadian readers' interest in abridged audiobooks, audiobooks with sound effects and/or music, and environmentally friendly print books is on the rise. I love this finding. Diversity and representation in books continues to be a priority for Canadian readers in 2023. That should make us proud. Overall, what does this tell us? Well, this gives us an overview and a picture of the reading public in Canada, but now we might want to ask, what's happening in schools? According to the 2018 and 2022 Program for International Student Assessment results, called the PISA results, Alberta students demonstrated exceptional performance. ranking first in Canada and second globally in reading and science and second in mathematics literacy. I want to say to all the teachers and former teachers in the audience, I credit you, the knowledgeable, creative, hardworking educators in Alberta and teacher education programs for these results. Give yourselves a hand. Now, given some of the things that are happening in schools right now, I also want to add these results are going to be difficult to maintain. Recent studies suggest that students in Alberta and around the world are facing challenges when it comes to maintaining a strong interest in reading as they progress through school. When teaching reading, teachers must continue to use long-form texts that increase the amount of time students have with what I call eyes-on text and encourage deep, engaged reading. It's important to use reading materials that contain complex and thought-provoking material because that has the greatest impact on cognitive development. And presenting reading material that's interesting and relevant to students matters too, because it's true that reading volume combined with challenging reading material leads to the greatest gains in general knowledge acquisition and critical thinking. Let's look at the trends across countries. Overall, these numbers are declining. As students move from elementary to middle and high school, their enthusiasm for reading declines. A 2019 study by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, found that the motivation to read significantly decreases after the elementary years, with many students expressing a preference for digital content over traditional reading materials. Factors contributing to this disinterest include the rise of social media and technology, the pressure of standardized testing, and the required reading that may feel disconnected from their personal interests. Understanding the reasons behind this disengagement is crucial, as it highlights the need for strategies that reignite a love for reading, helping students see its relevance beyond the classroom. Now, if you're still skeptical about whether or not being a reader matters, let's examine research that links reading to other benefits. Did you know that reading promotes empathy? Studies published in the journal Science by Kidd and Castano show that reading literary fiction improves the ability to understand others' emotions and perspectives, a skill known as theory of mind. This isn't just about understanding a character. It's about becoming more empathetic in real life. Researchers from the University of Toronto and York University, and just recently a study from Mount St. Vincent University, explored how individual readers described their experience of reading a fiction novel written by an Indigenous author, and the readers were non-Indigenous. The book they were reading was by author Richard Wagamese called Indian Horse. They found that readers showed empathic distress. They developed awareness. They learned new perspectives, and they were inspired to read and learn more. All responses that signaled and mediated change in their daily lives. Buchanan writes, so does reading still matter? Absolutely. Not because it's the only way to learn or escape or be entertained. We've got a million tools to do that, but because it makes us better at doing all those things. It sharpens our minds, stretches our imaginations, calms our nerves, and reminds us of what it means to be human. Maybe you've heard reading also benefits brain health. A growing body of research indicates that reading literally changes your mind. Using MRI scans, researchers have confirmed that reading involves a complex network of circuits and signals in the brain. As your reading ability matures, those networks also get stronger. and more sophisticated. In one study conducted in 2013, researchers used MRI scans to measure the effect of reading, this time a different novel, on the brain. Study participants read the novel Pompeii, a 2003 book by Robert Harris. It's a book that blends historical fiction with real-life eruptions of Mount Vesuvius. Over a period of 9 days of reading, the participants underwent regular MRI scans. As readers progress through the book and the tensions built in the story, their brain scans showed that more and more areas of the brain lit up with activity. And research recently published in a journal called Brain Connectivity demonstrates that the effects of reading linger even after you've put the book down, almost like a muscle memory for the brain. So these studies show that throughout the time you spend reading and for days afterwards, brain connectivity increases, especially in the part of the brain that responds to physical sensations like movement and pain. In other words, reading makes us feel something. What about how reading affects levels of stress, anxiety, depression even? Think right now about some of your favorite books. Maybe from childhood, maybe from years ago, last year, last week. You might not recall the title or the author, but maybe you remember how you felt. The feeling that you weren't alone, respite from what may have been going on in your life, or just the understanding that life is sometimes terrible and often wonderful. And now, let's just take a moment to compare the feelings that many of us have after pulling out our phones and scrolling. According to Daisy Buchanan, you are likely going to be presented with a great deal of emotive information. Posts like a disaster, a plane crash, a celebrity holidaying in the Maldives, an exercise plan, or one I particularly dislike called Sunday Reset, where someone shows their shopping and cooking for an entire week in one day. Whatever it is, it puts us into a reactive state. Feelings might emerge like anger, fear, sadness, envy. You know, there may be a time and a place for that passive scrolling, but too much of it can make us feel drained, frustrated, and unfulfilled. Research from the University of Sussex found that reading can reduce stress levels up to 68%, even more than listening to music or going for a walk. Dr. David Lewis, who conducted the study, explained that losing yourself in a book slows your heart rate and relaxes muscle tension. This makes reading a powerful tool for managing stress in our fast-paced lives. And finally, research from the Canadian Longitudinal Study on Aging and from the journal Neurology found that reading throughout life can reduce cognitive decline in older adults by up to 32%. Regular mental stimulation through activities like reading keeps the brain sharp and reduces the risk of conditions like dementia. The National Institute on Aging recommends reading books and magazines as a way of keeping your mind engaged as you grow older. And the earlier you start, the better. Two books related to this discussion that I'd really like to highlight here are The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt and How to Do Nothing by Jenny Odell. Haidt and Odell critique the pervasive attention economy where our time and focus are constantly monetized and exploited. You might want to think of attention, yours and mine, as the most precious resource we have. Why? Because it shapes how we think, what we learn, and how we experience life. Yet in today's world, it is constantly under siege. The authors of these books focus on how social media has hijacked our attention, which has led to rising anxiety and social disconnection, especially among young people. They encourage readers to disengage from the constant demands of technology, social media, and productivity culture, advocating for a more deliberate and thoughtful approach to how we spend time. The ideas expressed by these authors can certainly add to our understanding of the enduring value of reading. According to Haight and Odell, the act of reading promotes mindful consumption. In her book, Odell touches on the idea of rethinking consumption, something that can directly apply to how we engage with written content. Instead of passively consuming media, she suggests we become more aware of how we choose to spend our attention, which could lead readers to seek out material that encourages emotional growth or a deeper understanding of the issues and the world around them. While Odell's book doesn't directly discuss reading, her critiques of modern distractions and the importance of thoughtful disengagement from technology can lead to a renewed appreciation for slower, more mindful activities like reading. Through her perspective, we can re-envision reading as an act of resistance to the constant demands of the attention economy. How? By reclaiming reading as a practice that lets us remember what it's like to think for ourselves, to engage with ideas, to create more and consume less. Have you experienced reading recently as a deeply immersive experience, a way to resist the outside pressures and lose yourself? Have you found yourself thinking about a book, a newspaper article, long after you put it down? Well, some parents are actively trying to encourage this way of being in their children, in some interesting and unique ways, with some success, as this anecdote illustrates. In December of 2024, Mireille Silkoff, an author and cultural critic, appeared on CBC's The Current with Matt Galloway to discuss her unconventional approach to encouraging her 12-year-old daughter to read for pleasure. Silkoff, an avid reader herself, noticed her daughter preferred screens over books. After various unsuccessful attempts to foster a love for reading, she offered her daughter $100 to read a novel. This incentive led her daughter, though, to read Jenny Han's The Summer I Turned Pretty, a series of 3 books, and it ignited a newfound appreciation for reading. Now, Silkoff shared this experience in a New York Times article, which, as you can imagine, sparked a lot of discussion among parents and educators about using financial incentives to promote reading. In her article, Mireille Silkoff reflects on the challenges, though, of raising a child in the digital age, where screens often compete with books for attention. And she simply wanted her daughter to experience the joy of being immersed in a good book. So, after many unsuccessful attempts to foster a love of reading, she came up with this rather unconventional solution. So the goal wasn't just to get her to read, but to allow her to experience what it felt like to be consumed by a book. She was surprised the strategy worked, and her daughter did become hooked on the series and even began reading additional books on her own. In the article, Silkoff also discusses the broader implications, though, of using rewards for reading. We hope reading would be its own reward. However, she believes that finding ways to make reading exciting and engaging is crucial, and I agree. And just a thank you to our daughters, Amy and Erin, who we never had to pay to read. But we did buy a lot of books. In fact, reading, and by extension literacy, plays a critical role not just in individual lives, but on a global scale. Kofi Annan, former Secretary General of the United Nations, once said, Literacy is the road to human progress and the means through which every human being can realize their potential. This statement is powerful because it underscores the link between literacy and the development of a fair, just, and prosperous society. When people can read, they can access opportunities, whether they're educational, economic, or social. Literacy is not just about personal success. It's about societal progress. It enables individuals to be informed citizens, understand their rights, participate in democratic processes, and break free from cycles of poverty that limit potential. When children are taught to read, and when we continue to read as a nation, we are given the tools to succeed, academically, but personally and professionally. Literacy and reading ensure that people can engage with the world on their own terms. In this sense, reading is truly a pathway to freedom, equality, and opportunity. In the Faculty of Education, this is my favorite part, in the Faculty of Education at the University of Lethbridge, where I teach, we ask our student teachers to think, talk, and write about their literacy journeys. We ask them, what are your memories of reading? What were your favorite books? And if they don't remember, we suggest they talk to their parents, who do remember that they had to read Harold's Crayon every single night, until months later it mysteriously disappeared. As they think about their own literacy journeys, they often, though not always, have very positive early memories of reading with parents and grandparents, siblings, teachers, and friends. But they also recall when their interest in reading dropped off. And because we ask them to read books in our course of their own choosing, they do have the opportunity to fall in love with reading again, which I think some, maybe many of them do. And we don't pay them, by the way. But other student teachers talk about the challenges they had in school as readers. And now, through hindsight as young adults, and finding out more about how reading develops, they examine those past experiences through a new lens, bringing a new understanding to their challenges and helping them see how their roles as beginning teachers can positively influence the reading development of their future teachers. I'd like to tell you a bit about a unique approach that my colleagues and I use to inspire and re-inspire our student teachers to be the readers we need them to be to make a difference in the lives of their students. It's called book tasting. Have you heard of it? A book tasting is a classroom activity designed to introduce students of all ages to a variety of books in an engaging, low-pressure environment. It mimics the experience of sampling different dishes in a restaurant, but instead of food, students taste books. As you can see from the photos, we create a cafe atmosphere in our university classrooms. Arrange tables like a cafe, placing books in the center to be tasted. We use tablecloths, menus, and light background music to set the scene. Next, we select a variety of books, choosing from different genres, authors, reading levels. Many of our books feature Canadian authors like David Robertson, Marie-Louise Gay, Keo McClear, Susan Nielsen, Heather Smith, and so many more. And then we invite our knowledgeable book lovers, U of L booksellers Carrie Tanaka and Becky Colbeck, Paige McGeorge from the Lethbridge Public Library, and my interested colleagues, Rona Harkness and Jenna Lowe, to bring in their fabulous collections of high-interest books. We, the presenters, offer book talks of our favorites, which is a highlight of the semester for us. Our students spend time at each book tasting table, jotting down titles, first impressions, and interest levels. We include prompts like, what intrigued you about the book? Would you read it? Why or why not? How could you use this book in your upcoming practicum? And then students share their top picks and talk about which book stood out and why. and they take those books into classrooms during practicum and share them with students. In the last few months, Carrie, Rona, and I have been invited to facilitate book tasting in several school classrooms. One of our student interns, Taylor Pomahak, invited us to do a book tasting in grade 2 and 3 classrooms. Teacher Carly Gorick invited us to do book tasting in several grade 5 classrooms. And student intern Haley Tanton did her own book tasting session with her grade 10 social studies class. Haley's students were studying residential schools, and she said the experience of book tasting highlighted the power of books to build empathy and deepen understanding. Carly added, the variety of books, including exciting books about video games and hockey, sparked a passion for reading in every student, with many of them eagerly fighting over the books. And one of her grade 5 students added, sometimes the days are so much, but this was like a mindfulness exercise to just read. Grade 5. This is just one way that we try to demonstrate to the next generation of teachers that reading really does matter. And it encourages autonomy. Students have the freedom to explore books without pressure. It increases engagement through an interactive format that fosters curiosity and motivation. And it expands reading horizons by allowing exposure to different genres. Studies really highlight the importance of student choice and engagement in reading motivation. Guthrie and Wigfield found that when students have autonomy in selecting reading materials, their motivation and comprehension improve. Additionally, Wilhelm and Smith emphasize that reading engagement is strongly linked to students finding books they connect with, making book tastings a valuable strategy. However, it's important to point out that students need both time to pick their own books and read, but they also need time for reading instruction. And that's because teachers are tasked with teaching the skill, the will, and the thrill of reading, and it's a tall order. Lastly, throughout history, reading has been a powerful act of rebellion against oppressive forces. Governments, institutions, and communities have sought to ban books as a means of controlling thought, restricting access to new ideas, and limiting the choices available to individuals. By choosing to read, especially books that have been challenged or banned, we actively resist efforts to limit intellectual freedom. Reading is an act of defiance against censorship, an assertion of personal autonomy, and a declaration that we will not allow others to dictate the boundaries of our understanding. It empowers us to see beyond our immediate circumstances, empathize with others, and challenge the narratives imposed upon us. In a world where misinformation and dogma often go unchallenged, reading is not just an educational pursuit, it is an act of rebellion. Reading matters because it slows us down in a world that's moving way too fast. It forces us to focus, to think, to connect dots that no algorithm can connect for us. It teaches patience when we follow a story that doesn't reveal all of its secrets in the first 3 minutes, and imagination when the only special effects come from the words themselves. And according to Daisy Buchanan, author of Reading Yourself Happy, let's face it, books don't need charging, they don't have ads, and they won't accidentally play embarrassing videos at full volume in public. That alone is reason enough to keep reading. Plus, if nothing else, reading gives us one more thing to post on social media. Just finished this amazing book, highly recommend. And let's be honest, that's a perk in itself. And if this lecture hasn't convinced you to pick up a book, well, maybe try the audiobook. Thank you.
This was our final Public Professor Series talk for the 2024-25 season. Thank you for watching. We will be back next year with another thought-provoking lineup.